Miss Cargill says, "You refuse to believe that I was really in love with you. Well, it's natural that you shouldn't want to believe it. But you think or try to think that if I really suffered, I shouldn't want to let you know who I am. I shouldn't want to come and talk about the past. You're wrong, you know. It's both pain and pleasure to talk about the past, about you and me. These memories are painful, but I cherish them," Lord Claverton says. "If you really had been broken-hearted, I can't see how you could have acted as you did." Miss Cargill says, "Who can say whether a heart's been broken or it's been repaired? But I know what you mean. You mean that I would never have started an action for breach of promise. If I'd really cared for you, what sentimental nonsense. One starts an action simply because one must do something. Well, perhaps I shouldn't have settled out of court. My lawyer says I advise you to accept because Mr. Ferry will be standing for Parliament. His father has political ambitions for him. If he's lost a promise suit, some people won't want to appear as his supporters." He said, "What his lawyers are offering in settlement is twice as much as I think you'd be awarded." Effie was against it. She wanted you exposed, but I gave way. I didn't want to ruin you. If I'd carried on, it might have ended your career, and then you wouldn't have become Lord Claverton. So perhaps I laid the foundation of your fortunes." Lord Claverton says, "And perhaps at the same time of your own. I seem to remember it was only a year or so before your name appeared in very large letters in Shaftesbury Avenue." Miss Cargill says, "Yes, I had my art. Don't you remember what a hit I made with a number called 'It's Not Too Late for You to Love Me'? I could have put the feeling into it, I did. I couldn't have. But for what I'd gone through. Did you hear me sing it?" Lord Claverton says, "Yes, I heard you sing it." Miss Cargill says, "And what did you feel?" Lord Claverton says, "Nothing at all. I remember my surprise at finding that I felt nothing at all. I thought perhaps what a lucky escape it had been for both of us." Miss Cargill says, "That both of us was an afterthought, Richard. A lucky escape. You thought for you. You felt no embarrassment," Lord Claverton says. "Why should I feel embarrassment? My conscience was clear. A brief infatuation ended in the only way possible to our mutual satisfaction." Miss Cargill says, "Your conscience was clear." I've very seldom heard people mention their consciences, except to observe that their consciences were clear. You got out of a tangle for a large cash payment, and no publicity, so your conscience was clear. At bottom, I believe, you're still the same silly Richard you always were. You wanted to pose as a man of the world, and now you're posing as what I presume as an elder statesman. And the difference between being an elder statesman and posing successfully as an elder statesman is practically negligible. And you look the part, whatever part you played. I must say, you've always looked it," Lord Claverton says. "I've no longer any part to play, Maisie." Miss Cargill says, "There'll always be some sort of part for you, right to the end. You'll still be playing a part in your obituary, whoever writes it." Lord Claverton says, "Considering how long ago it was when you knew me, and considering the brevity of our acquaintance, you're surprisingly confident, I must say, about your understanding of my character." Miss Cargill says, "I've followed your progress year by year, Richard, and although it's true that our acquaintance was brief, our relations were intense enough, I think, to have given me one or two insights into you. No, Richard, don't imagine that I'm still in love with you, and you needn't think I idolize your memory. It's simply that I feel that we belong together. Now don't get alarmed, but you touch my soul, pawed it perhaps, and the touch still lingers, and I've touched yours. It's frightening to think that we're still together, and more frightening to think that we may always be together. There's a phrase I seem to remember reading somewhere, where their fires are not quenched. Do you know what I do? I read your letters every night," Lord Claverton says. "My letters?" Miss Cargill says, "Have you forgotten that you wrote me letters?" Oh, not very many. Only a few worth keeping. Only a few, but very beautiful. It was Effie said, when the break came, they'll be worth a fortune to you, Maisie. They would have figured at the trial, I suppose. If there had been a trial, don't you remember them? Lord Claverton says vaguely. Were they very passionate? Miss Cargill says, they were very loving. Would you like to read them? I'm afraid I can't show you the originals. They're in my lawyer's safe. But I have photostats, which are quite as good, I'm told. And I like to read them. In your own handwriting, Lord Claverton says, and have you shown these letters to many people? Miss Cargill says, only a few friends. Effie says, and if he becomes a famous man, and he should be in want, you could have these letters auctioned. Yes, I'll bring the photostats tomorrow morning and read them to you. Oh, there's Miss Pickett. She's bearing down on us. Isn't she frightful? She never stops talking. Can you bear it? If I go at once, perhaps she'll take the hint and leave us alone tomorrow. Good morning, Miss Pickett. Isn't it a glorious morning? Miss Pickett enters and says, Good morning, Cargill. Miss Cargill says, Dear Miss Pickett, it seems to me that you never sit still. You simply sacrifice yourself for us. Miss Pickett says, It's the breath of life to me, Miss Cargill, attending to my guests, and I like to feel they need me, Miss Cargill says. You do look after us well, Miss Pickett. You're so considerate and so understanding, Miss Pickett says. But I ought to introduce you. You've been talking to Lord Claverton, the famous Lord Claverton. This is Miss Cargill, two of our very nicest guests. I just came to see that Lord Claverton was comfortable. We can't allow him to tire himself with talking. What he needs is rest. You're not going, Miss Cargill. Miss Cargill says, Oh, I knew that Lord Claverton had come for a rest cure. And it struck me that he might find it a strain to have to cope with both of us at once. Besides, I ought to do my breathing exercises and exits. Lifelong focusing on breathing, even though we do it automatically, for most people is definitely going to be a helpful thing on multiple levels. Miss Pickett says, As a matter of fact, I flew to your rescue. That's why I brought your morning tipple myself, instead of leaving it as usual to nurse. When I saw that Miss Cargill had caught you, you wouldn't know that name, but you might remember her as Maisie Montjoy in Review. She was well known at one time. I'm afraid her name means nothing at all to the younger generation, but you and I should remember her, Lord Claverton. That tune she was humming. It's not too late for you to let me. Everybody was singing at once. A charming person, I dare say, but not quite your sort or mine. I suspected that she wanted to meet you, so I thought that I'd take the first opportunity of hinting, tactfully of course, that you should not be disturbed while she's gone now. If she bothers you again, just let me know. I'm afraid it's the penalty of being famous. Monica enters. Oh, Miss Claverton, very. Miss Pickett says to her, I didn't see you coming. Now I must fly. Monica says, I saw Miss Pickett bothering you again, so I hurried to your rescue. You look tired, Father. She ought to know better, but I'm all the more distressed because I have some not very good news for you. Lord Claverton says, Oh, indeed, what's the matter? Monica says, I didn't get far. I met Michael in the drive. He says he must see you. I'm afraid that something unpleasant has happened. Lord Claverton says, Was he driving his car? Monica says, No, he was walking. Lord Claverton says, I hope he's not had another accident. You know, after the last escapade of his, I've lived in terror of his running over somebody. Monica says, Why, Father? Should you be afraid of that? This shows how bad your nerves have been. He only ran into a tree. Well, that's about the biggest sign that, this is somebody who could hit somebody, not just Lord Claverton says, yes, a tree. It might have been a man. But it can't be that, or he wouldn't be at large. Perhaps he's in trouble with some woman or other. I'm sure he has friends whom he wouldn't care for you or me to know about. Monica says, it's probably money. Lord Claverton says, if it's only debts, once more I'll expect I can put up with it. But what is he? Monica says, I told him he must wait in the garden until I had prepared you. I've made him understand that the doctors want you to be free from worry. He won't make a scene, but I can see he's frightened. And you know what Michael is like when he's frightened. He's apt to be sullen and quick to take offense. So I hope you'll be patient, Lord Claverton says. Well then, fetch him. Let's get this over. Monica says, Michael! And Michael enters. Lord Claverton says, Good morning, Michael. Michael says, Good morning, Father. What a lovely day. I'm glad you're here to enjoy such weather. Lord Claverton says, You're here, I'm glad. Well, You're glad I'm here? Did you drive down from London? Michael says, I drove down last night. I'm staying at a pub, about 2 miles from here. Not a bad little place. And very convenient for the drinking, I'm sure. Lord Claverton says, Why are you staying there? I shouldn't have thought it would be the sort of place that you'd choose for a holiday. Michael says, Well, this isn't a holiday exactly, but this hotel was very well recommended. Good cooking for a country inn, and not at all expensive. Well, at least there's something worthwhile that he's going after. Lord Claverton says, You don't normally consider that a recommendation. Are you staying there long? For the whole of this holiday? Michael says, Well, this isn't a holiday exactly. Oh, I said that before, didn't I? Monica says, I wish you'd stop being so polite to each other. Michael, you know what you've come to ask of Father, and Father knows that you want something from him. Perhaps you'll get to the point if I leave you together. Michael says, You know, it's awfully hard to explain things to you. You've always made up your mind that I was to blame, before you knew the facts. The first thing I remember is being blamed for something I hadn't done. I never got over that. If you always blame a person, it's natural that he should end by getting into trouble. Lord Claverton says, You started pretty early getting into trouble, when you were expelled from your prep school for stealing. But come to the point. You're in trouble again. We'll ignore, if you please, the question of blame, which will spare you the necessity of blaming someone else. Just tell me what's happened. Michael says, Well, I've lost my job. Lord Claverton says, The position that Sir Alfred Walter made for you? Michael says, I'd stuck it for 2 years, and deadly dull it was.